Australian families don't typically aspire to apartment living. A quarter-acre block is more likely to be their dream. In other parts of the world, apartment living is seen as offering proximity to family connections, jobs, schools, parks, and other amenities.
A smaller size means greater affordability. As we make an apartment smaller, there's nothing to suggest that we make it less good, less livable.
I've got everything that I need just outside the door, so I didn't really feel the need for a massive space.
If we are going to grow our city in a sustainable way, we are going to need to challenge ourselves and start thinking outside the quarter-acre block.
What we find important in the work we do is to do research on what do people actually want and how can we fulfill their demands in the design that we make. The Houthaven project was designed for 41 apartments. We try to make the ideal family apartment with compact floor plans. Having social housing, affordable housing on a prime location like this is something that is very special. The average size of these apartments is approximately between 70 and 80 square meters. Within that size, we try to make at least 3 sleeping rooms.
We have been living here for a month and a half. We were living before on a 3rd floor, quite a small apartment with the 4 of us. The biggest change for us has been to move into a ground floor apartment.
All the ground apartments have their private garden, but also like a patio for everybody in the building. The contact with the neighbors is much more closer than before.
One of the greatest qualities of this apartment is the height of the ceiling. Even above the windows and the door, you see that there's a lot of light coming in. One of the design principles for compact living for families is double use of the space. We did it here by placing the kitchen inside the central hallway that connects the dining room with the living room. Although the surface area is relatively small, the back facade is completely open with glass, and terrace is almost feels like an extension of the living room. What I think is important for family living is a clear distinction between domains. So the living domain is on the ground floor and the sleeping domain is on the 1st floor. Next to the master bedroom, there's a bathroom and laundry.
The experience of living in this building is quite nice.
We're actually quite lucky, quite happy how it's been so far.
So, what happens when design doesn't consider people and their lifestyles?
I remember living in houses that just made me feel unhappy because they were dark and crummy and you just live in there because that's all you can afford. I remember living in Cairo, and I still remember fondly living in Cairo, that it was always just a joy to be in. Something doesn't need to be big to be good. A big part of the design of that apartment is revealing and concealing things to be able to be highly efficient, but then also kind of vanish. Creating some division of space in that apartment was really important to allow space to be able to retreat. Someone can sort of sleep in and the other one can get up and make breakfast or have a shower or whatnot. Cairo is located in Fitzroy, which is very close to the CBD. Having great amenity at your doorstep takes a lot of pressure off small footprint living. The whole city is a part of your house almost. It's just enriching to not have to rely on the place that you live to give you all of that cultural nutrients that people need. We don't live there now because we've got 2 little children, but Claire and I always say that's where we're going to retire to, or we might use it as a little city office if we ever move out into the country or something like that. It's always in the back of our minds as somewhere that we want to go back to. I think when designing a house, it can be tricky to think about how that can serve so many different phases in your life. This project comprises a backyard studio, the footprint of this particular project is around 30 square metres. Initial discussions with our client were for a place for their teenage son to finish high school and go to uni in. But then there's also aspirations beyond that period for it to be a home office and a sort of parents' retreat. We built along all of the boundaries of the backyard. And the little studio has a large roof popping up to try and catch the northern light so that we can create a nice bright space. Part of trying to create a small space that felt generous was to place it in the garden and make it feel like the interior looked out into the garden. Being able to have flexibility and use these backyards just means that your block of land can do so much more and serve so many more purposes, and small projects like this are brilliant for opening the opportunities of how families can stay together and be multi-generational rather than completely atomised and living all over the place.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because I remember Michael said there's this idea in architecture of doing infill projects, which is filling in empty bits of site, land that's unused in the city. Using leftover spaces is one of the most sustainable ways that I think our cities can grow and develop. The Loft houses were born as a collaboration between 2 adjacent neighbours. They wanted to convert some existing parking spots into guest houses at the back.
I got on really well with my neighbour, even though I didn't know him at the time, and it was an easy process between us. One of the considerations was I have 2 daughters, and this is also a great possibility when they are older where they can live independently close to where I live.
The site area is 35 square metres. The idea was to really create a bit of an oasis from the street. We wanted to be able to open up the front door, and the very first thing that you get is this real sense of calm. Not having your standard plasterboard ceiling here feels just a little bit more homely than being a commercial space. Having the extra 200 mils of the depth of the beams means the sense of spacing is greater. We've got this loft level bedroom. Part of that was driven around creating really good light into the apartment. We needed a balustrade to separate the spaces, but we wanted to feel as light as possible. What we did was set these uprights at 45 degrees to each other, so it just reads a little bit more spacious than if you just had straight up and downs. On this side of the room, we've got the wardrobe, which then rolls into a bench, which can be used as either a dresser, a desk. It continues along and becomes essentially the vanity to the bathroom. The pandemic has really driven a refocus on the importance of home and being in an environment that you want to live in. When you're dealing with a restricted space, you kind of need to pick those things that really are important to you and that you value, whether that's having a big kitchen area and being not so worried about having a TV room. Because a lot of apartment developers, investment driven, there's not a lot of consideration to having a bespoke approach. A lot of the developments are very cookie cutter of, here's your most efficient layout of a 3-bedroom apartment.
It's going to take, governance and design minds and developers and council to come together and to recognise that there are different models, there are different ways of doing things, rather than simply building stocky, bulky apartment buildings hard up against the road with masses of car parking. We need to be building slightly taller buildings that are slimmer and occupy less of the site. We get access to views, we get access to light, ventilation. Buildings that occupy less of the site mean that we can fill the area outside with green space. We can activate that space. The second thing is a possible reconsideration of the minimum apartment size. Now, we need to be very careful that that's not an opportunity for people to capitalise even further. But if we reduce the size, then we're going to reduce the cost. The size of an apartment in the current model doesn't account for ingenuity. The moment something becomes ingenious, it can become smaller and function at a greater level. We can think harder about our apartments and how we live, pull out the things that are non-essentials, and ultimately get better housing stock at a more affordable price point.
There's no big picture thinking to, the quality and amenity of space with a market-driven, economic approach to buildings, and they're not necessarily geared for families to live in as much. Whereas I think a lot of European countries have apartments that are much more amenable for families to live in. I just find it astounding that there's all of these precedents all over the world that we don't just copy it.
I've been to Taiwan. There, I think 30% of the houses were vacant because people just bought the house, kept it vacant for a year and sold it with a big profit. Amsterdam has these bylaws that stops the speculative housing market, which means that you have to live there yourself in the house and you can't just leave it vacant. And that is a really good way to make sure that there's not much vacancy in the city, because that really pushes up the price of the housing market.
Developers have a primary goal, and that's to make money. If you understand that, then you can, I think, get good development, because you can start to engage in a dialogue, allowing developers to make money, but make it in a way that is beneficial also to the city.
Yeah, it's really shallow.
Architects like Brett and Nick are using creative and clever design solutions to improve livability within the existing footprint of their cities. But if Melbourne continues to grow at its current rate, we need solutions like this at a larger scale. And there are plenty of successful ones in the other parts of the world. But here, the system seems rigged. Cookie-cutter approaches to residential developments are common because they are more profitable. But what are we signing people up for?